This video is Insurance 101 for Masonry Contractors. Look, I know you didn't get into business to buy insurance, but you still need to know what to buy. And in this video, I'm going to go through all of it, starting with the stuff you're probably going to buy first, ending with the lines of coverage you'll buy with a business that has grown and scaled. Let's get into it. The most common set of coverage limits that you're going to buy when you get started is $1 million of general liability per occurrence. Occurrence is the most that will be paid in one big lawsuit, and then a $2 million aggregate. Aggregate means the most that will be paid out over the course of 12 months. So think it's the sum of all your occurrences. Now, if you're trying to get onto a job site, there's probably some contract language you're going to have to comply with, especially if you're working with a GC or some type of building owner. They're going to want to be added as an additional insured on your liability insurance policy. They're also probably going to want to see that there's primary non-contributory language in your liability insurance so that your policy is going to pay first and protect them before their policy has to pay anything. And they're also going to want to see a waiver of subrogation, which says you're not going to come back after them after the fact. And then a per project aggregate. Basically, they want to see that if you have a big lawsuit at another job site, that it's not going to wipe out your insurance for their job site. It's important that when you're signing up for a contract, you check the insurance limits and the contract language first before you sign up, because sometimes you can get some nasty surprises on the back end. The second line of coverage you'll probably look at is commercial auto. A lot of people start by using one of their own personal trucks that's in their name, and then at some point they move the truck into the business. And so when you do that, you're going to need to look for auto liability. I recommend you get $1 million because one of the quickest ways you're going to have a catastrophic lawsuit is if you hit somebody in one of your vehicles on a big highway. You're also going to need to look at comprehensive and collision coverage, which is coverage for the truck itself. You should also be looking for rental reimbursement coverage in the event that you have to go rent another truck, and then towing. So, if you get into an accident, you're stuck on the side of the road, you're going to need to get your truck towed away someplace. Now, it's also important when you're looking at your auto insurance to look for hired and non-owned auto insurance. This pays for liability insurance associated with trucks that you rent. And it also pays non-owned liability insurance is liability insurance in excess of your employees' personal vehicles when they're driving those on behalf of the business. Third, let's talk about tools, because even when you're first getting started, you're probably going to have tools that you own that you take to job sites. Contents coverage on a liability policy will pay for things that are in an office, like a desk or a chair. But if you've got tools you're going to take to a job site, you need inland marine, you need contractors' equipment that's going to follow you wherever you go. Now, if you're taking on bigger jobs, you may also need what's called an installation floater. This is if you're going to buy materials on behalf of the customer and then transport it there, and then the customer does not own the equipment or the materials until you get it there. You need coverage for that stuff while it's being transported. That's called an installation floater. And also, if you're going to rent or lease equipment, it's really important that you have that taken care of in your tools coverage too. Lest you rent something from Penske, get into an accident, end up having to pay $12,000 out of pocket because it wasn't listed on the policy. Now, those are coverages that contractors have starting almost from the very beginning. But now let's talk about when you start to hire people. You're going to need to look at workers' compensation insurance. Workers' compensation insurance is based off the type of work that people do, the states where they go, the claims that you've had in the past. So masonry is not a cheap class code. You probably know that. Ways that you can deal with that is make sure you have good safety practices, do what you can to reduce claims. And also, if you've got people that only work in the office, make sure you split that off and make sure you have their payroll listed specifically in the office. Now, I'm in the Mid-Atlantic, and if you're in a multi-state situation, also keep in mind that there's different rates in different states. So the District of Columbia may be less expensive than Maryland, or Virginia may be less expensive than Maryland, which means if you have people living and working in another state, make sure that their payroll is in the correct state. There's compliance reasons for that, but there's also pricing reasons for it too. One other thing that you need to consider with workers' compensation so you don't get caught off guard, if you're going to have subcontractors, either make sure that they have their own workers' compensation insurance or you're accounting for them on your payroll, because at the end of the year, insurance company's going to audit your payroll. And if you've got uninsured subcontractors, they're going to ding you. They're going to make you pay for that because from their perspective, if you have an uninsured subcontractor that gets hurt on your job site, the insurance company is going to have to pay for their medical bills, which means they want to collect the premium for it. So from your perspective, either make sure you don't have any uninsured subcontractors or make sure you're accounting for it in your workers' compensation policy because you're going to have to pay for it one way or another. Okay, for a lot of smaller contractors, you usually work out of your home. Maybe you have something in your garage. But as you start to grow, or maybe you'll get a warehouse, you may own a building or you may have inventory on stock that you need to insure. And for that, you're going to need the appropriate property coverage. You're going to need to make sure you have enough for your buildings if you own them, your chairs, your desks, your computer equipment. You're also going to need to make sure you've got enough for your inventory. And then if you're dependent on where you do business and say you've got a warehouse and if it goes up in flames, it's going to impact your ability to make money. You also need to think about business income and extra expense coverage. What that pays for is a loss of net income and extra expenses associated with continuing your operations if you've had a covered claim. Let me try and speak in everyday language. If you've got a warehouse, goes up in flames, now you need to go rent a new warehouse, and it's going to take time to get that set up. You're going to have lower net income, and also you're paying more money for additional rents and utilities that you didn't have to pay for previously. That's business income and extra expense coverage. Once you got all that lined up, one of the things you're going to have to look at next as you grow is called an umbrella policy. Now, there's two scenarios where I see people look at umbrellas. One is they've got a contract that they need to comply with, or two, they've grown to a point where they feel like they've got additional risk and they don't feel like $1 million of insurance is enough to take care of the worst possible thing that could happen to them. So the way an umbrella policy works is it sits on top of the insurance policies that are listed below it. And what it does is it increases the maximum amount that'll be paid out in a lawsuit. So if you've got $1 million auto insurance policy and you've got a $5 million umbrella and you have a terrible auto insurance accident, the maximum that would be paid out in that situation is $6 million. $1 million under the auto policy, and then $5 million for the excess policy. Now, an important thing to keep in mind here is that a lot of companies do not like to stack their umbrella policy on top of somebody else's auto insurance policy. So if you're trying to split things out to create cost savings, just keep in mind you may be hurting yourself in the long run. Now that we've talked through that first level of coverages, let's get into some of the more specialty coverages that larger firms or more complex operations are going to need to look at. Contractors' pollution liability is one of the first ones. And actually, this can be relevant for almost any size masonry contractor. This pays for property damage associated with pollutants getting where they're not supposed to. Now, pollution in the insurance world is any type of chemical or material that gets into the ground that wasn't there before. So, cement, any type of gas or material that then might have to be cleaned up later, that can be considered pollution. So, from the very beginning, you might want to think about that. Now, the next coverage is professional liability. This is really for design and build type of contractors that are providing some type of professional service. So if you walk out and say, hey, I'll help you design it, figure out what it should look like, and then we'll put it there. If there's something wrong with your design, That's errors and omissions. It's more than showing up and looking at a blueprint and saying, I'm supposed to do this here, do this here. It's helping design the blueprint. The third specialty coverage that you think of, and this can apply to contractors of all sizes, basically from the time that you start having employees, is crime or employee dishonesty coverage. It is an employee embezzling money from you or potentially stealing money from a client. It's different from your normal property insurance coverage because you're talking about money. And for the most part, in most situations, when money is embezzled, it's done a little bit at a time over a long period of time. And we're talking about cash. So your contents coverage or your building coverage, it doesn't cover money. What we're talking about is money being stolen. The fourth one is cyber insurance. For a masonry contractor, the scenario that comes to mind is if you're working with a GC and they're giving you access to their system. And let's say one of your employees hands out their password or somebody gets into the GC's system through you. Now you have potentially compromised the GC's data and the building owner's data because you did not appropriately handle their information. Now, there's also if you've got client data on file, whether it's name, date of birth, credit card information, plans, if your systems get hacked and you have to pay for credit monitoring services and damages as a result, that is cyber liability coverage. And if you have to recreate that data, that's digital asset restoration. It's a real digital world out there, and more businesses are reliant on storing information in the cloud and in digital places to do business. And if that describes you, you should be looking at cyber insurance. You should also be looking at continuity plans and working with a managed IT service provider to help you think about how you would do business if your systems went down. But from an insurance perspective, cyber liability. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about is employment practices liability insurance. This pays for attorneys and settlements in the event of a hiring or firing dispute. So somebody comes back and says, hey, you fired me because I'm black, white, gay, Latino, man, woman, transitioning, whatever. And you say, no, it's just because you didn't show up on time. And they said, no, I'm going to the EEOC. Now you have to go hire an attorney. And those attorneys cost $500 to $1,000 an hour. And maybe you didn't button up your files exactly the way it needed to. And the attorney is saying, hey, look, here's the deal. If you go to court and get in front of a jury, that jury is not going to favor you. They're going to favor the other person. And they're saying, now you got to settle for $15,000. It's going to drive you crazy. You're going to be so mad because you didn't do anything wrong. But that's just the way the system works. And this is why employment practices liability insurance is so important. It's because you may be able to fire someone for any reason in the state of Maryland. They can sue you for almost any reason too. And it's really, really expensive to defend yourself. All right, that's everything you need to know about insurance for masonry contractors. If that was helpful and you want to talk to me about your program, my contact information is going to pop up on the screen. It's also going to be in the description. I'd love to talk to you. If this was helpful, please hit like and subscribe. It helps other people like you find the content. If you just want to drop a comment down and ask a question, I answer everything. Happy to do that. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and please go build something great.